Welcome back to Wichita's Biz That Is, and today our guest is Dr. Rick Kellerman. And we had sort of taken Rick's journey from Hays, Kansas, all the way to the medical college here. And we were talking about how just a couple of years ago, this college here became a four-year entity. Tell us what it was before and some of the differences.
Right. Well, at University of Kansas School of Medicine, it used to be that all of the medical students did their first 2 years in Kansas City, and then we had 50 to 60 of them that came down here for the third year and the fourth year. So at any given time, we would have 50 to 60 third-year students and 50 to 60 fourth-year students. 3 years ago, we brought our first class ever of first-year students to Wichita. And the reason we can do that are a lot of changes in medical education. But right now we've got our third class of first-year students. So right now we have 28 first-year students, 28 second-year students, and then that initial class of first-year students of 8 are now integrated into the third year, and we have a total of about 55 third-year students and 55 fourth-year students. So we've got all 4 years right here in Wichita. This has been just a real exciting thing for us in medical education. Part of the reason that we can do this is some changes in the way that we do medical education. It used to be that in the first 2 years, almost all of the training was book learning. And you go to a large lecture hall and you'd listen to the lecture. And we still have lectures, but because of televideo, of course, the students can watch the lectures right here. And another innovation is podcasting. And we tape the lectures, and what we found is that a lot of students don't go to the actual lectures. They stay at home, they watch the podcasts, which are really nice because, you know, have you ever been in a lecture that about 5 minutes into it, you're just totally lost?
No, I was probably asleep.
Yeah, you go to sleep after 5 or 10 minutes. Well, the medical students rewind, and, you know, this is highly technical information. So if they get lost, they rewind 3, 4, 5 minutes, get back into the flow of things. We've also found that some of our lectures speak very slowly, so they can speed up the podcast and get a 30-minute lecture, or get a 60-minute lecture in about 30 minutes. So that's one of the technologies. Now you think, well, gee, you know, what do the educators do? What do the physicians do? We've gone from large group lectures to small group, and what we're trying to do is make the small groups more interactive, try to introduce patient care and how you actually take care of a patient on the very first day of medical school. When I went to med school, I remember I had my books under one arm, a microscope in the other. I was really excited, but the first 2 years were book learning. And it took me 2 years, really, before we started seeing patients. Now we're trying to get patient care into that first week, if not first day, and really teach them about the patients they're going to see. And what happens is all of the concepts and all the technical things about medicine and all the pathology and the anatomy starts to make a little bit more sense if you're actually applying it to a patient.
Yeah, that was actually my next question was going to be what's changed, so that's probably the biggest change.
Yes, and one of the good things about here in Wichita, we've always been really good at the third and fourth year. We have excellent clinicians, excellent physicians who teach. And so this whole concept of teaching about the patients back in the first and second year, we're really good at that, and I think that's made it a very easy transition for us.
And hasn't it been the case that a community this size then offers just a broader array, not looking at diseases, but people and backgrounds and circumstances?
I mean, Wichita's a great place to learn medicine. First of all, you've got the 2 largest hospitals in the state here. People sometimes forget that. We also have a...
and they've been a big help to keeping that school going.
Oh, absolutely. We could not do this without the support of the hospitals, without the private physicians in town, long-term care centers, rural communities where we do some of our rotations. But we have a community-based concept in Wichita. This is not a traditional academic health center.
Has that produced
any
struggles at all over the years with KU? I used to sit on the advisory board, and I can recall at times having people down from the KU
Yes.
who didn't always understand what we were doing.
Yeah, I think for some people it is hard to understand. I think that as, especially in the late 70s and early 80s when this school was getting up on its feet, I think it was a real struggle back then to understand. But as we've seen more community-based schools start up in the last 30 or 40 years, I think there's a better understanding about the type of education we provide here. For Kansas, it's a great deal. You have a traditional academic health center in Kansas City. You have a community-based school in Wichita. Medical students have a choice of where they would fit in. So it's really been nice to have this choice. And now in Salina, we have another campus of 8 students, which is kind of experimental at this point, but the experiment's working very well in Salina too.
Tell me a little bit about what a student might experience when you say now in that first year you would actually have more contact with patients. What
Yes.
might that look like?
Yes. All of the medical students here are, in their very first year, are assigned to a preceptor. And so every 2 weeks they take time with that preceptor. Our physicians out into the community, so they rotate with the preceptors. We do what are called problem-based learning sessions. And what those are, I'm a problem-based learning session instructor. We have a case. We present the case to the students, but they have to figure out what's going on with this patient. I try to tell them very little. They have to struggle through getting the information about the patient, coming up with what we call a differential diagnosis. What are all of the things this patient could have? Then they have to narrow down on what the diagnosis is, figure out for themselves what the treatment is. And of course, the computer, the internet has made this possible. When we do a PBL, they're all on their computers looking up stuff, and it's very interactive and very different from the way that I went to medical school.
We've gotten to the diagnosis, and that's a good time for a break. We'll be right back in a moment.